Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 8 deadline decisions video. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the deadline. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel or if you are new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. Make sure to drop a like on the video as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, we are going to start today's video by discussing the Estupinan injury news and potential replacements if you are looking to replace him this week. So in case you did miss it, it looks like Estupinan has been ruled out for approximately 1 month by De Zerbi, but he did say sort of like 1 month more or less. So we don't have a specific time frame, but if it is indeed a month, I've got the fixtures in front of me, that would rule him out for Game Week 8 against Liverpool, Game Week 9 against Man City, Game Week 10 against Fulham, and then exactly a month today, or just a month and 1 day from today, would be Everton away in Game Week 11. So if it is around a month, he'll basically be touch and go for Game Week 11, and if not, he should be back for Game Week 12. But of course, these things can either be a lot quicker than we think, and he might be back around Game Week 10, or it could take a little bit longer, and it could be Game Week 12 or Game Week 13. But it looks like it'll be approximately 3 to 4 game weeks that Estupinan's out for, which basically means, yes, I do think it is worth selling him. That being said, the next two fixtures, you probably weren't looking to play Estupinan anyway. So it's Liverpool and Man City. You were probably thinking of playing 3 of your other defenders. So if you do have other defenders that you can play, and there is a chance that he's back around 10 or 11, it's not the end of the world holding him, especially if you have other fires to put out and maybe you don't have a wild card. But if you're on the wild card, you don't have Estupinan. And if you don't have other fires to put out, I do think he is a nice player to sell because I think there are some really nice replacements that also have quite high upside. Very briefly before I discuss the replacements for Estupinan, lots of people asking questions around Lamptey. My main issue with Lamptey is twofold. Firstly, Estupinan doesn't look like he's out for that long anyway, so it's not like that Lamptey's a brilliant pick very, very long term. So if you are on wildcard and you're considering Lamptey, or you're not going to play your wildcard until 19, or maybe you've already played your wildcard, then in my opinion, I don't really like Lamptey. If you're planning a wildcard around 10, 11, 12-ish, then of course, Lamptey could be a really decent shout. But you also have to remember that the next two fixtures aren't great. So yes, you can probably get away with playing Lamptey in Game Week 10, but in Game Week 8 and 9, even if Lamptey is starting, you probably don't want to have him. And my other issue is around the lack of game time that he's had. He's not played much game time for the last sort of season and a half. And so is he in a fitness state to be able to play the Premier League games and the European games as well in quick succession? Number one, will he be picked for all of the Premier League games? And even if he is, he could quite easily pick up an injury, which I hope isn't the case for him. But he has been struggling quite a lot in recent history. So I don't think he's a terrible pick on wildcard because he's 3.9 million, but for me, I'm not particularly interested, and I don't think he is a good replacement for Estupinan. So, who is the best replacement? This is, of course, assuming that you can't get to Kieran Trippier or that you don't want him, because obviously, Kieran Trippier is going to be one of the better defenders that you can own at the moment, and if somehow you can stretch to Trent, I also think Trent could be a decent shout. But let's say that you've got around the price of Estupinan, or maybe you want to go a little bit cheaper. Here are the 6 defenders, or 6 sort of sets of defenders that I would be considering. I still think that the best replacement probably is Matty Cash. The fixtures over the next 5 for Aston Villa are brilliant. Matty Cash has some of the best attacking data out of the defenders in the league this season. So he's attacking with great fixtures, and Aston Villa are a very decent defence. So Matty Cash has pretty much everything you would want from a defender, and whilst he is obviously rising in price very, very quickly at the moment, I still feel like he is worth it. Even if he gets up to sort of 5.1, it'll probably represent decent value. So for me, the obvious replacement for Estupinan is Matty Cash, and I don't think that matters if you're looking short term or if you're looking long term. I think if you're going to wildcard soon or you've already wildcarded, I still feel like Cash is the best replacement. After that, I do still think it's worth going for one of you, Doggy or Pedro Porro. I actually think Porro's the one to go for at the moment. His data looks a little bit better, and after Game Week 1, he's pretty much played 90 minutes in every single game. So I really like the look of Pedro Porro. He's taken slightly more shots than you, Doggy, and it may well be worth spending the little bit of extra money on Pedro Porro. If you've already got you, Doggy, and maybe you've got one of Maddison and Son, I don't mind you Doggy and Porro rather than doubling up on the Spurs mids, especially considering how many good midfielders there are. So by all means, go for a double up on the defence. They're not a terrible defence, Spurs, and the fixtures are there over the next few. Just do bear in mind that after the next 3 fixtures, they do start to deteriorate a little bit for Spurs. So really, you are targeting more of the short term than the longer term. If you don't want to go for Cashew, Doggy, or Porro, though, I actually think the Crystal Palace defence are slightly underrated. They are top half of the table for expected goals conceded, so they are a very decent defence. Last season, they were in the top 6 for expected goals conceded. So 2 seasons in a row, we are looking at a top 10, pushing towards top 8 and top 6 defence in the Premier League. And they have some really good options. Obviously, Anderson is the one that has stolen the headlines in recent weeks, but I actually think that Gahey and Mitchell for £0.3 million less could offer you very, very close to what Anderson gets. Their attacking data isn't quite as good as him, but they're both pretty decent for bonus points. Like I said, playing in a good defence, and the fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag, but generally speaking, they're quite good for Crystal Palace. So I actually think that Palace are a defence that are going very, very under the radar, especially on wildcards. And at the moment, I do have Gahey in my draft. Obviously, the West Ham defence could be really good too, because the fixtures from game week 10 onwards are absolutely exceptional for West Ham. But just a note, yes, the fixtures haven't been great so far for them, but their defensive data this season has been really poor. They're in the bottom 5 defences for expected goals conceded. So you would expect that to improve with the fixtures that they've got coming up, but they are by no means at the moment anyway like an elite defence. They're not getting close to the likes of Palace, Aston Villa, Spurs' data, but of course they do have their better fixtures to come, so maybe they will start to improve. And I do think that Vladimir Sofau could be the one, because his attacking data is okay. He looks very, very nailed at the moment, but I also do like the idea of an Agurd or a Zuma, just because they've got Ward-Prowse now, West Ham, and I do think that set-piece goals could become quite regular. So I really like the West Ham defence, and I still do think that the Newcastle defence, maybe I've been a little bit harsh to put the Newcastle defence as low as I have. I'm assuming that a lot of you might have one already, and I'm assuming that a lot of you might have Trippier, which is why they're in 5th. But if you don't own any Newcastle defenders at the moment, maybe it is worth going for one of Burn and Fabian Schär, because they are still one of the best defences in the league. And yes, you've missed the Sheffield United and Burnley fixtures, which were their better fixtures, but they're still not bad for Newcastle coming up. Then by no means sort of the best fixtures in the league, but they are still pretty good, and they are one of the better defences. So I really don't mind a punt on Burn or Schär. But I feel like if you've already got one, maybe you look elsewhere. Maybe you look at some of the other defences with slightly better fixtures. And then just in 6th, I've put Gabriel, because yes, the next 2 are not particularly good for Arsenal, but longer term, from game week 10 onwards, we're going to discuss Arsenal a little bit later in the video. The fixtures are actually really, really good, and you probably will want at least 1 or 2 Arsenal assets. And you may say, well, I'll bring in Saka or I'll bring in Ødegaard around game week 10 or 11, but then that's still only 1 Arsenal assets if you don't have any at the moment. So maybe putting Gabriel in on a wild card, or if you're not wildcarding but putting him in ahead of Estupinan, it could be a really decent shout. The only thing you would need to think about is you aren't going to want to play Gabriel in the next 2 game weeks. So it is more of a long-term transfer, and it would require you to probably bench him across the next 2 or start him and accept that clean sheets probably aren't that likely. So those would be my top replacements. I think it's a pretty straightforward switch to cash for me if you're looking not only short-term but a little bit longer term. Udogie and Porro really good over the short term, and then Newcastle, West Ham and Palace defenders, and even to some extent Arsenal defenders could be really, really decent shouts over the more longer-term period. So the flavour of the week at the moment appears to be Dominic Solanke. Lots of questions on my wildcard video, lots of questions on the preview video, and also on the tweet where I asked for questions for this video. And listen, I don't mind it at all. I'm not going to sit here and absolutely slate Solanke, which you may have expected. I don't mind it as a punt. And of course, the main thing that Solanke has going for him is that he's priced at 6.4 million. And lots of us are a little bit short on funds to get the exact wildcard team that we want. Or maybe if you're using transfers, you need a slightly cheaper player to allow you to squeeze in the likes of Salah, Son and Haaland. And yes, he's only like 0.3 less than DRB, or maybe something like 0.6 less than Alvarez, and that might not seem like a lot, but when we are trying to put our wildcard drafts together, that can make the difference. So I understand why he is so popular, and on top of that, the other thing going for him is the fixtures over the next 3 are exceptionally good. Everton, Wolves and Burnley, 2 of those games being at home. After that, the fixtures do really turn for Bournemouth, so I don't think you're going to want him from game week 11. But for the next 3 weeks, whilst you assess what's going on with your team, he feels like a pretty safe bet because of that price, because of those fixtures. And on top of that, the data's actually really good as well. And the other thing going for Solanke, and this sounds like a bit of a Solanke praising party, but one of the other things is he is so nailed. You can see here, he's played every minute available for Bournemouth so far this season. And on top of that, he's also on penalties as well. So what is there to dislike about Solanke? There's not a massive amount, to be honest. The fixtures are there, the price is there, the minutes are there, the penalties are there. I would just say that his data isn't exceptional. It's not underwhelming as such, but it's just very average for a £6.4 million forward. You can see here 0.42 non-penalty expected goals, 0.06 expected assist. So almost 0.5 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, which if you were to sort of summarise that, that means every 2 games, you would expect him to get 1 expected goal involvement. So basically, you'd expect him to score every other game, which is about right what you expect. If you played 90 minutes across 38 games, you would expect him to get about 19 attacking returns. So I think that would be very, very decent for his price point. You can see it involved in about 0.71 big chances per 92. So it's very solid data. but it isn't as good as the likes of even a Bowen or an Alvarez or other players in and around that. It's actually slightly better than Diaby, though, so it may be interesting there. So, yeah, there's very little to dislike. I'm struggling to give you many cons for Solanke. I suppose my main con for him, or the main reason that I'm not necessarily considering him myself, is more so I just see some higher upside attackers. So in particular, I'm going to have Haaland, in my opinion. I think he's worth having on the draft, which we will discuss at the end of the video. But then that leaves me with either 1 or 2 spots for Watkins, Darwin, Alvarez. I even don't mind a Wonyi, but then Solanke. And for me, at the moment, I value Alvarez, Watkins, and Darwin slightly ahead of Solanke, even when you take into account the price. I just think they are slightly more explosive picks. But what some of them don't have, and what many of them don't have, in fact, all 3 of the ones that I mentioned don't have, is absolutely nailed on for 90 minutes and also penalties. So that then maybe makes you think it swings it back in Solanke's favour. So basically, yeah, maybe we should be concerning him more. I mean, the data's there, the minutes are there, the fixtures are there. There's very little to dislike other than the fact that I just don't see him. And word of warning, I said this about Ollie Watkins before his 23-pointer, but I don't really see Solanke as the kind of player that is going to go out there and get you a monster haul. But could he get 2 or 3 attacking returns in the next 3 weeks? Absolutely. Let me know down below in the comments if you are considering Solanke. And I'll at least consider, if I do put him in my wildcard draft, what will that let me do with the remaining funds? So guys, I've been asked to do the unthinkable here and ignore data. But this is a really interesting question. Usually I would present data here and I would discuss the nuances in the fixtures and stuff. But someone's just asked, ignoring data, who do you think is the best captain this week? And do you know what? That's quite a refreshing approach. So I'm just going to discuss the 3 main captaincy options in my opinion. And also there were questions around sort of what are we valuing when we're looking at captaincy? Like, is it minutes? Is it fixtures? Is it form? And where am I currently leaning at the moment? So for me, this is a week to not captain Erling Haaland. And we've spoken about this before, and this is a little bit of data, but do bear with me. Haaland isn't great against, firstly, top 6 sides, but in particular, top 6 sides away from home. When he's playing at the Etihad, he's actually pretty decent still against those top sides. But when he's away from home against those top sides, not only do Man City struggle a little bit more, they don't tend to put too many goals past these teams, but also Haaland struggles a little bit more too. So Arsenal away is arguably the most difficult fixture that you could get for Haaland. Now, I don't think that Arsenal are defending as well as they did at points last season, but they are still one of the better defences in the league. And obviously, they still don't have Rodri, Man City, as well, which I do think affects them both going forward, but also defensively. So I actually think this is a fixture where Arsenal will look at this and think they might be able to get something from it. And I don't see Haaland getting too many opportunities. Now, do I think Haaland will get a return? Yes, I genuinely do. I think he's that kind of player where I expect him to return every single game week. But do I expect 2+ returns for Haaland? No, I don't, which is why I won't be captaining Haaland this week. So is he still a great option? Of course, every single week he is, but there are weeks to go against him, and Arsenal away is the week to do it. On top of that, he's not looked fantastic recently, and it's one of the reasons, again, we'll discuss later in the video, why so many people are looking at going without Haaland. Not only the fixtures, but also he's just not been finishing his chances. He's still accumulating a lot, although against Wolves, he barely accumulated any expected goal involvement, but he's just not quite at it. It's not a great fixture. And I think there are 2 other really, really good alternatives in Salah and Son. So for me, no, Erling Haaland is not going to be considered for captaincy for me. And it's just between the other 2, Salah and Son. There are discussions around the likes of Maddison or other players that you might want to go for. But for me, it is only between these 2. I'm actually currently leaning Mohamed Salah. And there are a few reasons for this. The main reason, though, on top, not necessarily the fixture or anything like that. The main reason is actually minutes. So I am recording this on Thursday evening, quite late, ready for a Friday morning release. We don't have a specific update on Son, but he has been pictured in training. So I fully expect Son to be available and to play and start the game. But clearly throughout the season thus far, maybe why he's been getting early subs even before we had the information around his recent knock. But he has been struggling with something, right? Son doesn't usually get early substitutions, but we've seen a little bit of it. We know he's been coming off early. We know he came off early also in game week 7 due to a knock too. And also, apparently earlier this week, he wasn't in some of the team training just to give him a bit of rest because he is struggling a little bit. So putting all of that together, Son is not at 100% fitness. And even if we get a positive update from Postecoglou, that doesn't suddenly mean that Son is fully fit. And I would be very surprised to see Son get more than 70 minutes again based on the information that I currently have. Now, if Postecoglou really does come out and say Sonny is absolutely fit and available, he's got over this knock, and we get a really positive update, then maybe that swings me back towards Son. But as things stand, I'm looking at it and seeing I'm either getting 70 minutes of Son against Luton away, or I'm getting 90 minutes of Salah against Brighton away. Now, this then goes back to the question of what should we value more, minutes, fixtures, form? And a lot of people will just simply go back to me and just say, Son only needs 70 minutes against Luton to score 2 or 3 goals. And absolutely, often players can. But if you actually look at the data, and we're going back to data a little bit, a lot of the sort of XG and a lot of chances that the teams accumulate in the Premier League is in the final moments of the game. So I think it is absolutely massive to have a player that stays on the pitch. We've actually seen that with Mbeumo twice this season, scoring post 90 minutes. Salah's done it on multiple occasions. So yes, Son could absolutely do damage in 70 minutes, and he may well get more than that, but he could do damage in the first 70. But I would always favour, if there is a close call, the player that is going to be on the pitch for an extra 20, 25 minutes. So for that reason, at the moment on Salah. Also, I think it is an excellent fixture, right? Brighton away. Brighton have not been a good defence this season by any means. They are bottom half of the table for expected goals conceded. They have shipped a lot of chances to multiple teams. We saw what Villa did against them. They actually struggled once again in Europe as well midweek. They look very, very tired as a team. They're giving up chances left, right and centre. Estupinan is injured as well, so it'll probably be Salah versus Lamptey. So basically, I think it's actually a much better fixture than it maybe looks on paper for Mohamed Salah. And I think there will be a lot of space for him to operate. I don't think the fixture is bad for Son by any means, but I think if it was Luton at home, I would be a lot more tempted. I actually think Luton are just a better side at home, and I think they will give Spurs a little more trouble. But am I expecting Spurs to score goals? Yes. Do I expect Son to return? Yes, also. I've just got a bit of a feeling that Salah is the one with the higher ceiling this week due to minutes, due to the way that I see that Brighton-Liverpool game playing out, and just due to the fact that Salah has the better data out of Salah and Son as well, so he's getting more chances to get attacking returns. So I know I've framed that in such a way that makes Salah the better option, but that is, in my opinion, the way that I'm currently viewing it. So if you were to ask me to rank them at the moment, I think it is 50-50 between Salah and Son, honestly, but I would go Salah just about at the moment, just due to the lack of doubts around his minutes, and also I do favour that Brighton fixture slightly. I would then go Heung-min Son, and I would then go Erling Haaland. But if we do get a super positive update around Heung-min Son, then I may well sway back to him. I would love to know down below in the comments who you're currently planning on captaining. I think this could be a pretty equal split this week. So we did briefly discuss Gabriel a little bit earlier, but there were some general questions around Arsenal assets and whether we are overlooking them at the moment, especially on Wildcard. And yeah, maybe we are, because the next two fixtures aren't great, right? Man City and Chelsea, especially from an attacking perspective, Chelsea have actually been very good defensively this season. We know how good City are as well. So I don't think these are two overly great fixtures. But I guess another way of flipping this is it is at home for them in Game Week 8. Rodri is still suspended. And City have looked a little bit susceptible in recent weeks to conceding. And Chelsea, it's a game that you would expect them to go for. Obviously, a London derby. Yes, they are slightly better at home than they are away. But I still feel like this is a fixture that they could attack. And then after those two fixtures, in the next three after that, they've got Sheffield United at home and Burnley at home. And then beyond that, Brentford, Wolves and Luton. So you could frame this in a much more positive way that the next two are definitely gettable for Arsenal and there will be goals. And then after that, the fixtures are really, really nice. The other way to frame it, though, like I said, is that the next two are pretty difficult. And if you take the next four, three of the next four are not good fixtures. Man City, Chelsea and Newcastle, they are not good fixtures for Arsenal. Yes, they've got Sheffield United chucked in there, but does that make the next four that much better that it's worth having them? Probably not. So my perspective on it is I don't think we are overlooking Arsenal players. We are deliberately choosing assets with better fixtures. But I do think we are overlooking how important it is to have a route back to Arsenal players. And I am guilty of this. In my current team, I do not have an easy route to Saka in Game Week 10, or to Ødegaard, or to whoever I want, Gabriel Jesus, Gabriel in defence. I don't have a route, really, to any Arsenal assets in 10. And you could say, well, you just ignore that fixture in 10 because 11 isn't great. But then in Game Week 12, I'm going to want them anyway. So I think especially for those of us on a wild card, we're not overlooking Arsenal players for Game Week 8. I actually think it makes sense to go without, but we are overlooking how we're going to get them back in. And maybe we are slightly overlooking an Arsenal defender, because I think it's maybe a slight waste to pick an Ødegaard, or if Saka is fit, which, again, I'm recording this on Thursday, so I don't have the Saka update, but it's maybe a bit of a waste picking an attacker, because there are so many attackers like Diaz and Darwin from Liverpool with great fixtures, or Watkins, and if Diaby is fit, there are lots of attackers that I think you could pick instead with really nice fixtures, even a James Maddison for 2 weeks and then switch. But defenders, it feels like you could tuck Gabriel as your fourth defender, first or second sub, get through the next two, and then from Game Week 10, you've got an Arsenal defender with really good fixtures. So I think that's much more of a possibility, especially at 4.7. I'm definitely considering getting Gabriel into my team, because that would then mean you've got one Arsenal asset already. bring in an Arsenal attacker in game week 10 or game week 12, and then you've got 2 or 3 Arsenal assets in the team. So yeah, to recap, I don't think we're overlooking. I think it makes sense to go without, especially in a wild card, but just have a route back to them. And also consider, is there a way that you can maybe squeeze an Arsenal defender into your team? So I do apologise for all of the wildcard specific questions, but this is also slightly relevant to those of you that are not on wildcard, and it's around formation. A lot of people going between a 3-5-2 and a 3-4-3 at the moment and wondering, is there an optimal formation? Is there a clear winner, in my opinion, that you should be going for? And which formation do I prefer on wildcard at the moment? And this is a very tricky one, because if you've watched my recent 2 drafts, I started in a 3-4-3. I then went to a 3-5-2, and little spoiler alert, I'm actually back in a 3-4-3 again, but I don't think it's as straightforward as there being a clear winner. The reason that a lot of people are struggling with this is a lot of people have 6 attackers that they really want. It's usually Salah, Son, Maddison, Haaland, Watkins, one other that they know they definitely want, and it's that 7th attacker they can get between the likes of a Solanke, a Bowen, an Alvarez, and a Wanyi, a Neto for some people, an Almiron, and they're going back and forth between whether they want that to be a forward or whether they want that to be a midfielder. And normally I would go based on structure. So I say this at the start of the season, I think especially in game week 1, rather than selecting based on personnel, so rather than saying I want Solanke, therefore I'm going to go for a 3-4-3, I usually recommend that you go based on structure. So do you think there are more midfielders that you will want in the near future at that price point? Or do you think there are more forwards that you might want in the future at that price point? Because yes, that player might look good now, but if they're not performing, you then have to sell them, and sometimes you won't have the money to upgrade them. So if the difference is between Solanke up top versus, I don't know, like a Matoma in the midfield at roughly the same price, are there more midfielders that you might want around that price to move to if Matoma didn't work out, just as a hypothetical example? Or are there more forwards around that Solanke price that you might want to move to? And if that's the way that you're answering the question, I would always favour a 3-5-2, especially this season, just because when I look at forwards in and around, especially that Solanke price, but even potentially as expensive as Alvarez at 7, I don't see a massive amount of forwards. You've got Watkins and you've got Darwin that are obviously 7.4 and 8 million now. So those 2 are really good, but they're of course more expensive than most of the others that people are looking at. You do have Solanke and Alvarez, but in and around that, there aren't a great deal of options that I would be particularly interested in. So if that third forward that you go for in a 3-4-3 doesn't perform particularly well, you've either got to use 2 free transfers to switch back to a 3-5-2, or find the money to upgrade them, or hope that just a random other player that we've maybe not considered starts to pop up as a decent option. And that can happen. I just feel like the 3-4-3 is slightly more risky for that reason. It's that I just don't think there are as many forwards to potentially shift to. Whereas in the midfield, I could sit here and list 20 to 25 midfielders that you could potentially go for. And even in that price bracket between 5.5 and 7, there are a good 6 or 7 or even 8 midfielders that you could justify going for, like the likes of Almiron, Ward-Prowse, Matoma, Diaby, Neto, Gordon when he's back as well. Like, there are so many midfielders that you can move to. I just think it leaves you a little bit more flexible. The issue, though, is that for me, Alvarez and Solanke are really good options. And yes, structure is important, but if you do really back Alvarez and Solanke as that third forward, maybe alongside a Watkins and a Haaland to do well, then maybe it is worth taking the risk. And that's why at the moment, I do have 3 forwards, and I've got Watkins, Haaland, and Alvarez, because I think Watkins and Haaland make a lot of sense. And do I think that Alvarez will outscore a lot of the midfielders in and around sort of 6.5 to 7 million? I really do think he will. I think he will be that consistent regardless of the fixtures. So I don't think I've helped you answer that question at all. All of that to say that I think if you are going sensible, and if I was giving you my sensible content creator advice, I would say 3-5-2 due to flexibility and where you might wish to move in the future, especially with, from game week 10 onwards, Matoma and Diaby very likely being good options. However, I do really like the third forwards in a lot of teams, so I do understand why you might want to go that way. So the next section is discussing Erling Haaland, and we did discuss this a little bit earlier in the week, so we won't talk about it for too long here, but can we go without him? And this is relevant to both wildcarders and non-wildcarders, because of course, wildcarders can spread their funds around really nicely, and non-wildcarders might be looking to try and get the likes of Salah and Son into their team with Trippier and Watkins. And the only way to do that is for Erling Haaland to make way. So let's discuss all of that stuff here. On your screen, you can see an Erling Haaland-less draft for wildcard. And I'll be honest, it's complete and utter perfection other than the fact that it doesn't have Haaland. But I do really like it, and I do understand the value in it. So I'm going to answer this first for wildcarders, right? If you're on your wildcard this week, should you sell Erling Haaland? I certainly don't hate it. And as you can see on the screen, you can build a perfect draft with 8 strong attackers, a really strong defense, a decent bench. And this actually has 1.3 million in the bank. But because I'm building it on Hub, and of course, that hasn't taken into account the price changes that I've caught this week, it says 0.7 in the bank. So not only can you build the perfect team with a perfect bench, a strong midfield, and an 8th attacker, like I said, you also have 1.3 million in the bank, which allows you to shift to the likes of Bruno Fernandes and Saka. So it not only sets you up well now, but it sets you up for those fixture swings in Game Week 10 and Game Week 11, but you don't have Erling Haaland. So that is the only real issue. And the reason that I wouldn't go without Erling Haaland myself is, let's say that your prediction is that this team will do enough to justify dropping Erling Haaland, which I do think it well could. And I think if you go without Haaland, you deserve to get a little bit of that because it is brave. But let's say you get that wrong, which you can. People get stuff wrong in FPL. What on earth are you going to do? Because realistically, the only way to get Haaland back in, if you build something like this, there's 2 ways. One is selling Salah and maybe making another transfer to then get the funds to get back up to the £40 million Haaland. So you have to remove Salah, which you may not want to do, especially if Salah is performing well alongside Haaland. Or you have to make several transfers to get back close to what we would have just had on your wildcard anyway, which is a Son, Salah, Haaland draft. Or you just suck it up and continue to go without him and he continues to batter your rank. So I guess what I'm saying is, without the wildcard in your back pocket, dropping Haaland is an incredible risk because there's no real good way back to him. Whereas now if I go back to non-wildcarders, assuming you haven't already used your wildcard in the first 7 game weeks and you've actually still got your wildcard in the back pocket, well then of course that makes it a lot more simple, because if you then get it wrong and you've sold Haaland, well then you just wildcard out of it. You say, you know what, I bite the bullet, I understand that it was wrong to sell Haaland, I'll bring him back in on my wildcard. So I think if you've got your wildcard in the back pocket, it makes it a lot more simple to sell him. I think if you've already played your wildcard or you're on your wildcard, just think, how on earth am I going to get back to him if I'm wrong? And I know that's maybe not the best way to play FPL because you can't own everyone and sometimes you are wrong. But Haaland is one of very few players that will heavily, heavily punish you if you are wrong. And so for me, I think it just makes more sense to have him because I don't want the risk of having played my wildcard, spreading the funds, and then desperately clawing to try and get back to him. We did discuss in the Game Week preview video sort of the value in selling him, and it is the fixtures. But I did also just warn that the fixtures aren't as bad as maybe they first seem. The next 3... Arsenal away is not a great fixture, which is why I'm not looking to captain Haaland. But after that, he's got Brighton at home, arguably one of the better captaincies, even maybe on top of Salah and Son. And then in Game Week 10, he's got Manchester United away. I mean, I'm a United fan. I'm dreading that game. So I don't think they're necessarily terrible fixtures. And whilst you won't captain him every week, I still expect Haaland to get a lot of points. So for me, on wildcard, I'm not considering it, but I understand why you would want to. This is the rough draft that I would build if I was considering going without Erling Haaland. And I think if you have your wildcard in your back pocket, it makes it a lot easier to sell him. So there's been a whole lot of wildcard chat throughout the week on my channel and also in this video. But a few people wondering, is the free hit viable? Because maybe you've got a few flags in your team, but you're not necessarily unhappy with your team, but you're struggling to field a good 11 this week. There are some fixtures that you might want to attack this week as well, where maybe you don't own that many assets from. Is a free hit viable? And of course it is. A free hit is always viable. Don't let anyone tell you that it's the wrong week to play a free hit. I may well suggest, which I'm going to in a second, that it's not necessarily the best week in my opinion, but you never know. You could play it in what looks on paper to be a terrible week to play it, but it could comfortably outscore your team by 40 or 50 points. That can happen in FPL. So never let anyone tell you it's the wrong week to play it. But I'm going to give you a few reasons why, in my opinion, this isn't the best week to play it for most people, right? There's 2 reasons. The first is the free hit looks a whole lot like a wild card. And if you do have a wild card in your back pocket, yes, you may be thinking, I want to save that for 10, but I would probably just play it early, because when you look, again, I've built a free hit that you can see on your screen now. It's not too dissimilar from a wildcard. I mean, there are a few different things. You might want to go for a triple up on Spurs and a triple up on Liverpool. You can see I've got triple Liverpool attack and triple Spurs attack, because I think it's worth attacking those 2 fixtures, because I can see there being a lot of goals. And this is something that not many other people will have, because it's so risky longer term. And Luis Diaz and Darwin look absolutely nailed on to start this game here. Richarlison should start on the left. So I really like this very aggressive play. But other than that, the general structure to the team and the players that you might be interested in targeting are probably very similar. So why not just pull the wildcard forward a little bit and actually save your free hit? Because if you're going to wildcard in a few weeks anyway, it makes sense. Now, of course, if your plan is to save the wildcard until Game Week 18 or Game Week 19, or potentially you've already played your wildcard, then it's a little bit different. But I would still wonder, will there be better weeks in the future, whether that be blanks, doubles, or weeks where a lot of your players have terrible fixtures, where it might be slightly better to play the free hit? And then that comes on to my final point about why I think it might not be necessarily the best, is actually the person that asked me about the free hit that I saw. They had Estupinan, Botman, Saka. They had one more player that was injured, and then Diaby was the player. So they were going, yeah, there's tons of flags in my team. I'm not going to wildcard. Can I free hit? But Estupinan's out long term. Botman could be out, even if he's only out for a couple game weeks, right? There's a chance he won't be back for game week 9. Diaby, we don't yet have an update on. Saka, we don't yet know how serious that injury is. So, yes, it may well work out that by the time post-international break comes back around game week 9, you're in an absolutely fine position with your team. But there are quite a few players that aren't necessarily going to be back for game week 9. And then when you take into account there's also an international break between 8 and 9, let's say you pick up 1 or 2 further injuries and Estupinan and Botman and the likes are still out. You may be going into game week 9 still with 4, 5 or 6 flags. And then what do you do at that point? So very, very team dependent as always. But unless you have a perfect situation where you just think it makes tons of sense to free hit for your team, I think there will be better opportunities in the future. But if you are looking to free hit, just because quite a few people ask me, here is roughly what I would go. I always go super aggressive on free hits. I double up, I triple up, and I really try and target the fixtures that I think will be good. And this is roughly what I'd be going for. So guys, of course, I will be doing a deadline stream on Saturday morning where I show you my final team and react to all of the press conference updates and any early team news that we get. But I thought I would just show you roughly what my thought process is behind my wildcard at the moment. So this is the current wildcard. And for large spells, this is roughly what the team has looked like. I've been going back and forth. I did show you my team with Luis Diaz and Alvarez as opposed to Watkins and Diaby. But the more I think about it, the more I do want Aston Villa attackers. They've had pretty tricky fixtures, and they are still the fourth or fifth best attack in the league. So I do want a piece of that attack. And I actually still think Diaby and Watkins as a double up isn't a bad option. But of course, I do want the likes of Diaz. I want Bowen. I want Alvarez. I want all of these players. But you do have to be quite selective with it. So for the time being, I think the goalkeeper situation is very straightforward for me. I'm happy with it. And I think the defence is actually relatively secure, depending on what I do with the attack. But the defence and the goalkeepers haven't changed too much. Salah, Maddison, Son hasn't changed. Haaland hasn't changed. So really Watkins and Diaby have. And then also you can see Bowen and Mbama. If Diaby is fit, and I apologise, I have to record this before the press conferences, but if Diaby is fit, I will have him. And I think I will have Watkins. So what it comes down to is Bowen versus Alvarez. It's a relatively straightforward decision, right? Just a 50-50. Who do I want, Bowen or Alvarez? And I think from game week 10, I would really like Bowen, right? The fixtures are absolutely there for him. We've got, obviously, Newcastle and Villa aren't great, but after that, you've got Everton, Brentford, Forest, Burnley, Palace, Spurs, Fulham, Wolves, even up to United in 18. The fixtures are absolutely there to attack. So that is a possibility, is just go for Bowen. The next 2 aren't great, but I do really like him, and his data is very, very strong as well. But I also absolutely love Julian Alvarez. And whilst the fixtures aren't necessarily there, like I said, I don't think Brighton and Manchester United are bad. Then Bournemouth in game week 11. And I do think his minutes are going to be pretty secure. So for me at the moment, if Diaby is fit, and this is roughly what I go for, pretty much the only final decision is between Bowen and between Alvarez. So I'd love to know down below in the comments, what do you think on that? But I have explored something else. And it's not ideal. And by all means, talk me out of it, because I usually don't recommend doing this. But I have explored just going super, super cheap on the bench. So if I do put Chukwuemeka in here, and I put Alvarez in here, and instead of Diaby, I get that man in that I really want, which is Luis Diaz. And we've spoken about Diaz in my team selection video. He is a player that I would really want in my team. All I then have to do is just lose Guehi for Kabore. The issue is that makes my bench very weak. But I say it makes my bench very weak. Taylor looks really nailed at the moment. Kabore, as we see if we just click on him, has been getting very good minutes, right? Yes, he came off in the 61st against Burnley, but he's started now 4 games in a row. In 2 of them, he got 90. In 1 of them, he got 84. So I think Kabore's minutes are secure enough. Charlie Taylor looks absolutely nailed, right? He's played 90 minutes since game week 5 in every single fixture. And I do have Cash, Burn, and Udogie, who most weeks I actually don't mind playing as a set of 3. On top of that, I think when Chukwuemeka's back, I do think he'll get some decent minutes once his match fitness is back up. So it is a very cheap, weak bench. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's a strong bench for a second, but I do have players that do play. And most of the time, if there is an injury to your starting 11, you just make a transfer. Because I've seen people that have a relatively strong bench that are still taking -4s and -8s this week to get other players in. Because most of the time, you probably don't want to rely on your bench overly. You want to get strong players in your starting 11. So I do like having a decent bench, and I would like to have a better bench than this. But this is quite possibly like the perfect team for me. I think the goalkeepers are perfect. Cash, Burn, and Udogie, I would argue, are the 3 best defenders to own. I get my 4 favourite midfielders in Salah, Maddison, Son, and Diaz. I don't quite get Bowen in there, but again, you can't own everyone. And then I get the perfect front 3, in my opinion, of Watkins, Haaland, and Alvarez. And again, I would love Darwin, but it's very, very difficult. So I would love to know what you think of this. Is it too weak on the bench? Are you not a fan of it, and do you think I should go back? So if I just refresh this very quickly, this is where I am at the moment, because I have a little bit of money tied up in Burn because I bought him in before the price rise. So I could very well go in with this 3-5-2, which I would be very, very happy with. I think it has most of the key players other than Kieran Trippier. But then I do also have, like I said, the possibility of, in that Bowen spot, putting Chukwuemeka, and then in that Mabama spot, putting Alvarez. And I'll be honest, at the moment, I am probably leaning this. But it is reliant on Diaby being available. If he's not, then I have multiple choices. I could go for Ward-Prowse in that spot, potentially, and then have a little bit of money in the bank. I could actually go straight for a Matoma if I wanted to, which I think is a possibility. I could switch to a 4 at the back and get Kieran Trippier, and then obviously switch out Chukwuemeka. But I think for the time being, let's wait. Let's leave it there. We need the press conference updates. I really do like the front 3 of Watkins, Haaland, Alvarez. Salah, Maddison, Son are pretty nailed for me. It's just that 4th and 5th midfield spot and whether I change Alvarez to Bowen. The defense looks fairly secure. I like the goalkeepers. I'm pretty much there with the wild card, but I'd love to know what you think of those different combinations down below. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 8 deadline decisions video and a little bit about my team at the end as well. If you did enjoy today's video, please do drop a like. Let's aim for 2,000 likes on today's video, and make sure to subscribe as well. I do really, really appreciate it. Turn on notifications, and also tune into tomorrow's deadline stream as well, where I'll be going through my final deadline draft. My final draft ahead of the deadline, and also hopefully getting some early team news as well. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.